In this video, we'll talk about how do we describe qualitative information. Now, qualitative factors often come in the form of binary information. So when we think about what is binary information or binary qualitative information, we can think about whether a worker belongs to a union or not. Okay, whether a firm offers a 401k pension plan or not. Okay, so these values would be either 0 or 1, 0 typically indicating the absence of something and 1 indicating the presence of something. Okay, and typically the variable would be indicative of that, and we'll see some examples in a bit. But these binary variables can be defined, and sometimes these are also called dummy variables or 0-1 variables to emphasize the two values that they typically take on. Now, one thing to remember is that you always want to make your variables or choose variable names so that it's descriptive of what values it's taking on. So the name of the variable itself should tell you about which value is assigned 0 and which value is 1. So let's take an example. Let's say we have 4 individuals in our data set. Okay, hopefully that's not the case in your sample, but just play along for now. So let's say person 1, if we are trying to define a variable and we have some information on a person's, let's say sex, okay, which is given at birth. Let's say the first person is female, second is female, third is male, fourth is female, right? We can then derive another variable, let's call it female, okay, which takes the value of 1 if the individual is female and 0 otherwise, right? So here the only other category is male, so it takes a value of 0. Okay, so now we have basically made a variable that is more or contains more information about what the value of the variable is going to be. So female, if we are trying to indicate the sex or the gender, female, which is 1 if the person is female, 0 if the person is male, is a better name than sex or gender, because by this name we don't really know what sex equals 1 or gender equals 1 corresponds to. Okay, so this is something you want to keep in mind, and always try to mutate your data or change and create another variable which is more indicative of what's going on in the data. And remember, for the purposes of some of the examples that we might take in this lecture, we're not really distinguishing between sex and gender. Sex is, given at birth and is male or female. Gender is a more complex social construct. So we're not getting into those details here. Versus gender identity is a feeling or expression. So it could be even more complex than gender itself. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're thinking about your data sets. So here's an example. This is coming from the GPA2 data set already in the Bullrich package. And here you can see the variable female is taking 0-1 values. And this is indicative, or this is telling us, for instance, that the person in the first observation is female, and the next few people are males. Okay, so that's the idea here. Now, this question comes up a lot of times. Do we really need to take 0-1 values, or can we just take any 2 different values? How about 99 and 100? Okay, you can. Okay, so for distinguishing any 2 types or more types, you can always take different values, but we will see later on when we come to define or interpret our regression that 0 and 1 are really very convenient for our use in regression analysis. We can definitely have more pieces of qualitative information in our regression. So let's say we have information on sex and marital status. Okay, and typically that would be captured, if you were really defining your variables, it would be captured by female or male, right? It really depends on how you're defining your variable. If the variable that you want to define is female, that would take a value of 1 if the individual is female. Or you could define a variable which is male, and male would take the value of 1 if the individual is male. So it really depends on how you want to specify your regression. But both of these are indicative of what's going on in the data. Okay, so let's say we have sex, which is captured by female, and then marital status, which is captured by the variable married. And so here you can basically imagine that married would take a value of 1 if the person is married and 0 otherwise. Okay, so here you can come up with 4 different categories if you interact these variables. So if you create a variable which is single female, for this person, you're basically interacting 2 variables, married times female, and definitely if the person was single, then married would take a value of 0, female would take the value of 1, so single female would be given a value of 0, right? If that's how we were defining it. Okay. So the 4 categories would be married male, married female, single male, and single female based on this data.